Picture a kitchen. Not the one you're imagining right now. Not the clean, bright place in your head with the refrigerator humming and the cereal boxes lined up on the shelf. Not the kitchen that smells like dish soap and yesterday's coffee and whatever you made last week that's still vaguely in the air above the stove. A different kitchen. Picture a farmhouse kitchen in rural Wisconsin in 1935. The stove is a cast iron beast that hasn't been completely cold since before the current family moved in. The smell is layers deep, rendered lard from this morning's breakfast still warm in the pan, the sour sweet weight of a crock of sauerkraut fermenting on the counter in its third week, dried herbs bundled and hung from the ceiling beams so thick that when the afternoon light comes through the window at the right angle, they throw shadows like a small forest. Add to that the mineral smell of water pumped from the well, the faint sweetness of an apple pie cooling on the windowsill made with apples from the tree in the yard that were planted by a woman who has been dead for 30 years, and the background smell of wood smoke and autumn, and an entire season's worth of canning jars lined up on the pantry shelves like soldiers, full of tomatoes and peaches and green beans that won't run out until March. There's a woman in that kitchen who knows things. She knows how to tell if bread dough is ready by the feel of it under her palms, a specific elasticity, a particular resistance that gives and then holds. She knows exactly how long to cook a pot of beans by the sound they make against the bottom of the pot. A soft, persistent bubbling that changes to something slightly louder when the skins begin to split. She knows which mushrooms will kill you and which ones taste better than anything you've ever had in your life. And she learned both from her mother, who learned from her mother, who learned from a woman who crossed an ocean in the hold of a ship and arrived in a country that spoke a different language but had some of the same mushrooms, which was something at least. This woman is holding knowledge in her hands, in her nose, in the calluses of her palms and the fine white scars on her left hand from 30 years of fast knife work. Now, jump forward exactly 20 years. Picture a kitchen in a suburb outside Chicago, 1955. It is clean in a way that the kitchen in Wisconsin never was, not through neglect, but through a different philosophy of what cleanliness is for. White linoleum, bright appliances in shades of mint and butter yellow, a refrigerator that hums pleasantly to itself, full of things in boxes and cans and wax paper packages, a pantry that smells like cardboard and salt, and a chemical sweetness that doesn't have a name in any language that existed before about 1940. The woman standing in that kitchen is looking at a box of Jell-O with a gelatin mold recipe on the back and wondering if she should add the canned fruit cocktail now or after. She has lost something, not through stupidity, not through laziness, not through any personal failure whatsoever. The system was built specifically, intentionally, over decades of science and money and marketing and genuine good intention to make her lose it. And she doesn't even know it happened. That's tonight's story. A story about how the greatest food supply in human history was built, how it changed what hundreds of millions of people ate and thought and knew, and what the true cost of the trade was and wasn't. I make these sleep stories because history is most alive when it lives in a body, in the smell of something, in hands doing work, in the particular tiredness of a specific person at the end of a specific day. And this particular story, food, hunger, kitchens, the chemicals that replace the crock of sauerkraut, is one of the most intimate stories there is, because it happened in the one room of every house where life was most consistently, most physically real. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness. For half a second you don't know where you are. Then it hits you. Not a smell for once, a sound. The radiator in the corner of the bedroom is doing its thing. That particular gurgling clank that starts at 5:40 every morning like a very bad alarm clock. The steam pipes expanding with heat, knocking against the bracket that holds them to the wall with a rhythmic tinny percussion that is entirely specific to this building, this apartment, this corner of Chicago. You're in Chicago. You're in the apartment on North Clark Street, second floor, one bedroom, shared with Dorothy Marchetti from the accounting department at Continental Foods, who keeps the bathroom like a pharmacy, and who you like very much except for the way she hums while she's getting ready in the mornings. Not quite a melody, not quite nothing, a sound somewhere between contentment and ambient noise. Dorothy is not humming yet. Dorothy is still asleep. You can hear it through the wall, slow, steady, the breathing of someone who has no particular quarrel with the morning. The radiator does its thing again. You are awake. The room is cold in the way Chicago rooms are cold in November 1956, which is a specific kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the fact that the building is 40 years old and the windows fit their frames the way a wrong-size puzzle piece fits its hole. There's a draft coming from the lower left corner of the bedroom window, steady and thin as a letter opener blade, persistent, finding the gap in your blanket and your sleeve and the side of your neck where the pillow doesn't cover. You pull the blanket up. The blanket is not warm enough. It is never warm enough. You bought it at the Woolworths on Michigan Avenue in September, when you first moved here from Madison, and you were thinking about September cold, not November cold. September cold and November cold in Chicago are entirely different problems. September cold is a suggestion. November cold in Chicago is a position statement. Your name is Ruth Kowalski. You're 24 years old. You grew up on a dairy farm outside Sheboygan, Wisconsin, the youngest of four, the one everyone was quietly surprised about when she turned out to be good at chemistry. Good at it in the way that means she understood it rather than simply performed it, felt the logic of reactions in her gut before she could articulate the mechanism. Your father thought you should marry Danny Chernowski from the next farm over, who was a perfectly acceptable young man, and whose fault it was not that you couldn't stop thinking about molecular structures. Your mother thought you should at least get your degree first. Your chemistry professor at UW-Madison thought you should apply to the Continental Foods Corporation's new food science division, which was hiring women with science backgrounds because the field was expanding faster than the men, who traditionally filled it. You applied, you got the job, you moved to Chicago with a trunk, a winter coat that turns out to be insufficient, and a letter of employment on company letterhead that your father folded and unfolded enough times to soften its creases before finally placing it in the kitchen drawer where important documents go. He is still not entirely recovered from the news. You've been in Chicago 4 months, working as a junior food technologist at Continental Foods, which is located in a massive facility on the south side that smells, depending on which part of the building you're in, like either a sugar refinery, a chemistry laboratory, or something you can't immediately identify but which you strongly suspect is artificial bacon. A smell that is almost bacon, that addresses itself to the part of your brain that processes bacon, but that resolves, when you pay close attention, into something that is not quite the real thing, close but not there. You've become attuned to that quality, the almost but not there. It's becoming, possibly against your will, the central question of your professional life. It is not glamorous work food science, not the way chemistry was described to you in school, all clean reactions and precise discoveries. But it is work that matters, your boss, Dr. Harmon Briggs, told you in your interview, and you believed him, and you mostly still believe him, though some mornings, this particular morning, with the radiator clanking and the draft knifing through the blanket, you're less certain what matters means in the context of making powdered soup taste more like soup. You get up anyway. The floor is cold through your wool socks, not the clean cold of the farmhouse kitchen in Sheboygan, which was a wood smoke and ice cold, a cold that felt honest about its nature. This is Chicago cold, pavement cold, a cold that carries coal dust and exhaust in it, even through the closed window that smells faintly of the million lives being lived within half a mile of you. You pad to the bathroom before Dorothy wakes up. The bathroom is a negotiated space, its territorial lines understood if not explicitly drawn. Dorothy's things are arranged with the precision of someone who has given this serious thought. Her cold cream, her powder, her collection of lipsticks organised in a row by shade from coral to dark red, each cap aligned. You take up considerably less of the mirror shelf. A bar of soap, slightly grey-green with age, a tube of Colgate that needs to be squeezed from the bottom, a hairbrush that needs cleaning and that you keep meaning to clean. You look at yourself in the mirror. You look like someone who slept too hot and too cold simultaneously, which is in fact what happened, because one side of you was cooking under the blanket and the other side was being knifed by the draft. Your hair is dark and usually straight and is currently doing something architecturally complex. You have your father's jaw, solid, decided, and your mother's eyes, which are the brown with gold in them colour that looks different in different lights. Neither of your parents would entirely recognise you in this bathroom in this city, not because you've changed drastically, because the context has changed around you, and context changes a person more than anything. You wash your face with cold water. The shock of it is complete and non-negotiable. It wakes you up the way cold water always does, completely without gradation, without the slow warming up that sleep warmth wants. Your reflection in the mirror looks more like you now, more like the version of you that has a badge that says Kowalski R. Food technology, and knows things about modified starch and flavour volatiles and the precise amount of monosodium glutamate that makes a product taste like something rather than nothing. You get dressed in the cold, wool skirt, good blouse with a small collar, the cardigan your mother sent last month, with a note that said, "Chicago gets cold," as if you had not already discovered this independently. Stockings that take 3 attempts because your fingers are still clumsy from sleep. The fine nylon catching at a rough cuticle and threatening to run. Shoes that are sensible rather than pretty. The kind of shoes that say you have a job that requires walking. Dorothy is starting to hum through the wall. You go to make coffee. The kitchen in the apartment is small and functional, and stocked almost entirely with the products of companies like the one you work for. Maxwell House in a red tin, Kellogg's cornflakes, Hellman's mayonnaise, a box of Jell-O in raspberry flavour, a can of Campbell's tomato soup that has been on the shelf since September and that you keep meaning to use and never do. Not out of waste exactly, but out of a reluctance you don't examine too closely. You know too much about how all of it is made. This is the professional curse you've acquired in 4 months. Before, Continental Foods, you could eat a bowl of cereal without thinking about the extrusion process, the coating bath, the vitamin fortification that happens in a separate pass, The specific sugars added at different stages to produce a product that is simultaneously crunchy, sweet, shelf-stable for 6 months, and able to survive contact with milk for approximately 4 minutes before going soft. Now you think about it every single time. The coffee, at least, is just coffee. Ground beans, hot water. You can drink coffee without it becoming a food science problem. You pour cornflakes into a bowl. The sound they make against the ceramic, dry, papery, slightly hollow, is one of the defining sounds of American breakfast. A sound as recognizable and specific as the church bells of the town you grew up in, which is a strange comparison, and also, you think, an accurate one. You add milk from the bottle on the icebox shelf, and the small storm of cornflakes rising and resettling in the milk is as briefly beautiful. You eat standing at the counter, looking through the kitchen window into the alley. The alley is Chicago in November. A brick wall, a row of garbage cans with their lids tilted at various angles, the skeletal frame of a fire escape on the building across the way. A cat is doing something purposeful near the nearest garbage can, its movements efficient and unself-conscious. A man in a heavy coat is walking through the alley with his head down and his hands buried deep, going somewhere with the particular directional certainty of someone who has done this route 10,000 times. Everybody in Chicago is always going somewhere. You finish the cornflakes, wash the bowl, put on your coat, and go. The L takes you south. The elevated train, its steel frame the faded green of old money, rattling and shrieking on its tracks above the street, carrying you and 45 other people toward their various mornings. You've gotten used to the L the way you get used to most things in Chicago, by submitting to it completely and abandoning the project of making it comfortable. The seats are hard wooden slats. The windows are drafty with the same determined dedication as your apartment window. The noise is substantial and layered. The clatter of the wheels on the straightaways, the particular high-pitched screech as the car negotiates the curve at Fullerton, the way the whole car sways into it like a slow lean, and the collective slight adjustment of weight as everyone shifts to maintain balance without consciously deciding to. The man standing to your left is reading the Tribune, folded into quarters with the precision of someone who's been doing this on moving trains for years, managing to turn pages against the vibration with a kind of absorbed efficiency. You can read the headline sideways. Something about Eisenhower. Something about the interstate highway system. The highway system. You've been reading about this in the trade journals that pile up on your workstation at Continental. The interstate's being built, a federal project of extraordinary scale, connecting the country coast to coast, state to state, with a standardized network of roads designed to move military equipment in the event of nuclear attack and commercial goods in every other event. You think, not for the first time, about what it means for food. Because food moves. Food has always moved. On rivers, on railroads, on the backs of animals and people. But roads like the ones being built mean trucks. And trucks moving fast on standardized roads means things can travel farther and in more controlled conditions than ever before. Refrigerated trucks maintaining specific temperatures across 1,500 miles. Things grown in one climate arriving fresh, or fresh appearing, in climates that couldn't produce them, which means the geography of food stops mattering as much as it used to, which means a tomato grown in California can be eaten in Maine, which means a factory in Chicago can produce something that shows up in kitchens from Bangor to Bakersfield to Albuquerque, which means the local, the seasonal, the particular and specific, all of that starts to blur into something that is everywhere and therefore nowhere. You've been turning this thought over for months, the way you turn a problem in the lab, coming at it from different angles, looking for the shape of it. The L screeches into the Cermak stop. You get off. The Continental Foods Corporation occupies a city block and a half on the south side, 5 minutes walk from the elevated platform. You've learned to walk this 5 minutes with deliberate speed because November wind in Chicago does not reward hesitation. It comes off Lake Michigan from the east, hitting the streets at angles that the building arrangement does nothing to deflect, and it has a personal quality. Not malicious exactly, but indifferent in the way that large indifferent things are more unsettling than hostile ones. The building itself is not beautiful. It is a 1940s industrial building the colour of old mustard, 6 stories tall, with small windows at regular intervals, and a loading dock along the south side where trucks arrive and depart at all hours. There's a water tower on the roof. There are power lines feeding the building from 3 directions. And then there is the smell. You can smell continental foods from half a block away on a still day. On a day like today, with the wind moving, you catch it from the L platform. It is not one smell, but a rotating sequence, depending on what's running in production. Sometimes sweet, a concentrated sugar cooking sweetness that has its own particular weight in the cold air, like walking into an invisible wall of confection. Sometimes savoury, a meaty chemical undertone that you've identified, in your 4 months here, as autolyzed yeast extract, which is what Continental puts in soup mix when they want it to taste like there's actually meat in it. Sometimes a clean, sharp chemical smell, the solvent and synthesis smell of the flavour development division where you work, which has its own character, a smell that is neither food nor not food, but something in the conceptual space between them. A smell, you've started thinking, of food being thought about rather than food being made. Your badge gets you through the front door. The lobby is institutional in the way of a building that was designed to be efficient rather than impressive. Linoleum in a grey and white pattern, fluorescent light that is consistent and even and slightly flattening, a reception desk staffed by a woman named Gretchen, who has been at Continental since 1943, and who knows the interior workings of this building the way the building itself knows its plumbing. On your first day, before you had even found your workstation, Gretchen told you that the 3rd floor bathroom had better lighting, but the 2nd floor bathroom had more privacy. She delivered this information with the tone of a general sharing tactical intelligence that has been tested in the field. She was correct on both counts. You verified this. You check in, collect your messages from the pigeonhole for Kowalski R, a note from Dr. Briggs about a 9 o'clock meeting, a memo from the product development team about the reformulation of the soup line, a catalogue from a flavour supplier in New Jersey that someone has thoughtfully flagged with a paperclip. You take the elevator to the 4th floor where food science lives. The elevator doors open and the smell hits you. It always does. Every morning, regardless of what day, regardless of what project is running. The 4th floor of Continental Foods Corporation smells like someone's idea of food, not food itself, not the specific, irreducible smell of a real thing, but the concentrated, clinical, carefully constructed idea of food. Food as concept. Food as information. The flavour library is at the east end of this floor, behind a door that stays closed, and it contains, you've counted, 247 small brown glass bottles, each holding a few millilitres of concentrated flavour, each labelled in the company's precise system. Strawberry Natural 4A, strawberry artificial, 7. B, strawberry enhanced blend, cherry dark, cherry light, raspberry top note, raspberry base, and so on through fruits and into savouries and into things that describe foods adjacent to actual foods. Roasted chicken, mild. Roasted chicken, dark. Chicken fat base, chicken umami boost. You cannot smell each of these individually from the corridor. What you smell is the aggregate ghost of all of them. The ambient atmosphere of a room containing the distilled essences of 247 things, releasing their volatile compounds at room temperature through their stoppered glass lids. It is layered and dense and slightly sweet at the front and something more complex underneath, and it is consistently slightly wrong. It smells like food the way a photograph smells like the place it was taken, related, referring to something real, but not the real thing. You've gotten mostly used to it. In your first week, you went home with headaches. Real, specific headaches centered behind your eyes. The kind that too much chemical smell can produce when your brain is spending extra energy trying to pass what it's receiving. Now your nose adjusts within 3 minutes and you stop noticing consciously. The food science division is a long room divided into 12 workstations, each equipped with a small gas burner, a calibrated scale, a rack of glass measuring vessels, and enough paperwork to construct a modest fortification. 3 women, 9 men. Dr. Briggs considers this ratio a sign of progress and is not wrong in the context of 1956 American industrial food science, where 3 women in a division of 12 represent something. You've chosen not to feel grateful for this specifically. You've chosen to feel professionally engaged and leave the gratitude for when the ratio improves further. You sit at your workstation and open the memo about the soup line. Continental is reformulating its dry chicken noodle soup mix. The current formula uses a percentage of actual dehydrated chicken powder, which is expensive, sourced from real chickens processed in a separate facility in Iowa, with price variability tied to the poultry market. The reformulation proposal reduces this percentage and increases the proportion of autolyzed yeast extract and monosodium glutamate. Monosodium glutamate. MSG. You've been working with it for 4 months, and it still impresses you with its particular property, which is this. It makes things taste more like themselves, not by adding flavour exactly, but by amplifying it, by speaking directly to a specific class of taste receptor that a Japanese chemist named Kikunae Ikeda identified and named in 1908. Umami, the 5th taste, the deep savoury satisfying flavour of proteins, of food that nourishes. MSG hits that receptor and turns the volume up. Put it in a soup that is 60% autolyzed yeast extract and dehydrated starch, and it will taste more like chicken than the chemistry strictly warrants. You've tested this. The difference in blind tastings is significant and consistent. You've also tested the difference between the reformulated continental soup and real chicken soup. This test is not part of your official assignment. You ran it on your own time, in your own kitchen on North Clark Street, with a batch of stock made from bones you bought from the butcher on Clark Street for 40 cents. Dorothy tasted both without knowing which was which, and correctly identified the real soup as somehow more, in a way she couldn't articulate further, and the packet soup as fine, it's soup. Fine, it's soup is, in fact, the complete ambition of the product you're working on. You flip to the technical specifications and begin the day's work. The 9 o'clock meeting is in Dr. Briggs's office. His office is distinguished from the rest of the fourth floor by having a door that closes, one very good chair that he occupies, two functional chairs for visitors, a window that looks directly onto the loading dock, and a quality of deliberate order that is different from the general organised chaos of the laboratory space. His desk has things on it in specific positions. The bookshelf behind him has books by subject, and by author within subject. The filing cabinet has labels written in his own hand in a system that, he mentioned once, he developed during the war and has not changed since. Dr. Harmon Briggs is 52 years old. He has the posture of a man who used to run long distances and has not run long distances in some years, but who retains the structural alignment of it in his spine. Grey at both temples, growing. A quality of attention when he looks at you that you found unsettling in your first weeks and have since come to recognise as simply the mode he operates in. He pays attention to things. He does it without performance. He has a doctorate from MIT, 1928, in applied chemistry. He worked for the Army Quartermaster Corps during the war on ration development. He considers this the formative period of his career, and it shows in the precision with which he thinks about scale, about what a formula means not in a test kitchen, but in a production run of 10,000 units, 100,000 units, 1,000,000 units. The math of that scale is always present in how he talks about food. Sit down, Ruth. First name's in his office. In the lab, everyone is a last name. You sit. He has the memo and your test notes in front of him, the notes covered in your own handwriting, a particular technical shorthand you've developed that Dorothy once picked up off the counter at home and studied briefly before concluding she couldn't read it. You wrote acceptable here, he says, and then you crossed it out and wrote acceptable with reservations. Yes, sir. What reservations? The aftertaste. He looks up. Elaborate. The reformulated version has a slight metallic aftertaste, about 30 seconds after swallowing. It's faint, and the majority of test subjects didn't identify it spontaneously. But when I asked them specifically to notice the 30-second mark, about 40% could describe it. I think it's an interaction between the MSG concentration and the modified starch at the hydration level we're using. Can you fix it? Probably. I'd need to test different hydration ratios and potentially adjust the sequence in which the compounds are combined. The order of mixing matters for how the starch binds to the other particles. He looks at the notes again. His index finger taps the desk once, twice. A thinking rhythm. The reformulation saves 11 cents per unit at production scale. He says this not as a defence, not as a contradiction of your concern. He says it the way he tells you a temperature threshold or a reaction rate, as a fact, a constraint in the problem. 11 cents per unit at scale is a number large enough that your hesitation about metallic aftertaste needs to either be solvable or needs to be documented and accepted as within tolerance. I can solve it, I think. Then solve it. He closes the folder. He picks up a different folder. The other thing, the company has commissioned a study on sodium levels across the product lines. The production team wants to know which products can tolerate a reduction in sodium content without losing consumer palatability. You'll be running the taste tests. Who decided on the methodology for acceptable palatability thresholds? He looks at you with a version of his attention that has assessment in it alongside the focus, reading you. The production team proposed the methodology. It's based on previous studies. Why? I've been reading some research coming out of Scandinavia on sodium, and I know the research. Not dismissive, just factual, in the way he is factual about things he's already considered. And we'll have that conversation at the appropriate time. Right now, the company needs data on what consumers can taste and what they can't taste. That is also a scientific question. That is also your job. You recognize the edge of the territory. You've gotten better at recognizing edges. Yes, sir. A pause. The loading dock is visible through his window, a truck being backed in with the particular skill of a professional driver. Small adjustments, back and forth, until the angle is exactly right. Your instincts are good, he says, not looking up from his papers. The metallic aftertaste is real. Trust them. You take that with you. Pause here. Before we go further into Ruth's day, before the soup and the chemicals and the afternoon on the production floor, we need to understand how we got to this building on this street in 1956. How the American kitchen went from the sauerkraut crock and the cast iron stove and the woman who knew which mushrooms would kill you to a shelf full of cardboard boxes and a flavour library containing roasted chicken, mild, in a 2 milliliter brown glass bottle. It didn't happen overnight. It happened over 100 years, in steps that were each individually reasonable, each individually moving a civilization further from one kind of knowledge and closer to another. Start with Nicholas Appert, not a scientist technically, a Parisian confectioner. The year is 1810, and Napoleon Bonaparte is trying to feed an army across half of Europe. And the problem, as it has been the problem for every army since armies existed, is that food rots. You cannot march a barrel of stew from Paris to Moscow. By the time you reach Poland, it has become something you would not willingly describe to anyone. The armies of history have always been limited by this. You can move soldiers fast, but food moves slow and changes unpredictably. Napoleon offered 12,000 francs for a solution, a substantial prize, the kind that attracts serious people. Appert spent 15 years experimenting. He tried things nobody had tried systematically. He put food in glass bottles and sealed them and submerged them in boiling water. He didn't know why this worked. Louis Pasteur and germ theory were still 50 years in the future, but he was rigorous enough to see that it worked, reliably, across different foods and different time scales. Sealed and heated, the food lasted for months. He won the prize. An Englishman named Peter Durand improved the method almost immediately, substituting tin plate canisters for the fragile glass. Cans, the tin can, and with the tin can, the industrial food supply was born. Think about what this meant. For the entirety of human history before this moment, food preservation required either salt, smoke, fermentation, or cold. All of these were local, labour-intensive, seasonally constrained and tied to the specific ingredients and conditions of specific places. Canning was different. Canning was scalable. Canning could be industrialized. Canning could separate the making of food from the eating of it by hundreds of miles and many months of time. And that separation, which seems like logistics, was actually a profound change in what food was. Food had always been immediate, seasonal, local, particular. You ate what grew near you when it grew. Canning said, "Not anymore." Canning said, "This tomato grown in Maryland in August can be eaten in Ohio in February, and the tomato will be, if not exactly what it was in August in Maryland, recognizably a tomato." The Civil War accelerated everything. Both armies ate canned food, imperfect, variable, occasionally dangerous from poorly sealed cans, but logistically possible in a way that fresh provisions were not at the scale of that war. By the time the war ended, the infrastructure for commercial canning existed, and the commercial canners used it. By 1880, American canning operations up and down the East Coast processed oysters, salmon, tomatoes, corn, and everything else that would go in a tin and be sealed. The grocery stores carried them, the housewives bought them, and the housewives of 1880 had mixed feelings. On one hand, genuinely useful. Tomatoes in January, salmon in Ohio, things previously impossible or seasonal now available. That's real. On the other hand, taste. The canning process. Sustained high heat necessarily changes food. It softens it, concentrates some flavour compounds and destroys others. A canned tomato and a fresh tomato are related but not the same. A woman in 1880 who had spent 40 years cooking with fresh ingredients could taste the difference clearly and without question. But her daughter grew up with cans in the pantry, grew up with canned tomatoes as a normal expected presence, would taste a canned tomato and think, this is what tomatoes taste like, not worse than fresh. Just, this is what tomatoes are. And her daughter's daughter would have no comparison at all. That is how you change what a population considers normal. You don't convince the generation that remembers real. You wait for the generation that doesn't remember. You provide the baseline for the next generation, and the next generation provides the baseline for the one after it. And 50 years later, you are not fighting tradition anymore because tradition has become your product. The canning industry understood this, not necessarily consciously, but the logic of it drove the industry's expansion, whether or not anyone articulated it. Now jump to 1930, Clarence Birdseye. Birdseye was a naturalist and fur trader who spent time in Labrador in the 1910s. He was not a food scientist. He was a man who paid close attention to things. In Labrador, he watched the Inuit preserve food by freezing it. Not the way food freezes in a regular cold room which produces large ice crystals that rupture the cell walls of the food and turn its texture to mush when thawed. The temperature in Labrador in winter could drop to 50 degrees below zero, which meant that when a fish went into a bucket of seawater in that temperature, it froze in minutes. Fast frozen food, when thawed, retained its cellular structure, retained its texture, tasted significantly closer to the fresh thing. Birdseye spent the 1920s developing industrial quick freezing equipment, machines that could produce the same extreme cold and the same speed in a factory setting. In 1929, he sold his patents and his company to the Postum Company, which would eventually become General Foods, for $22 million. $22 million in 1929 is not a number you arrive at by accident. The Postum Company understood what they had purchased. The beginning of a supply chain that would eventually put fresh-tasting food from any geography into any American home at any time of year, except for one problem: housewives. In 1930 didn't have freezers. Most households didn't have electric refrigerators yet. The icebox was still the standard. There was no point in selling frozen food to people who had no way to keep it frozen at home. So the company went to grocery stores and paid to install specialized freezer cases. The first ones appeared in Springfield, Massachusetts in 1930. 10 stores. Limited selection, meats, vegetables, fruits, seafood. Sales were modest. The Depression hit. The country was worried about eating at all, not about whether frozen peas retained their cellular integrity. But the equipment spread. The supply chain developed. The grocery stores invested in frozen cases because the food companies subsidized them. The refrigerator manufacturers produced models with bigger freezer compartments because the grocery stores said consumers wanted them. The consumers bought the bigger freezers because the grocery stores stocked frozen food, each part of the system pulling the others along, slow reciprocal momentum that built over 2 decades until, in the year Ruth arrives in Chicago, roughly 90% of American homes have mechanical refrigerators with usable freezer space. What accelerated it to that point was the war. You cannot understand processed food in America without the war. World War II didn't just change politics and geography and the distribution of military power. It changed what Americans ate and, more fundamentally, what Americans thought food was for. Dr. Briggs was part of this. He spent 1942 to 1945 working for the Army Quartermaster Corps at the Subsistence Research Laboratory in Chicago. Right here, a few miles from where Ruth sits at her workstation this November morning. The laboratory's mission was specific and enormous. 12 million men, deployed across every climate and terrain on Earth, needing 3 meals a day. The problem was not just scale, though scale was staggering. The problem was the nature of what the food needed to be. It needed to survive a 6-month sea voyage in the hold of a transport ship. It needed to function at temperatures ranging from the North African desert to the Alaskan Aleutians. It needed to be carried by a soldier across a jungle or a mountain range or a muddy field in Belgium. It needed to provide specific, calculated nutritional requirements, the right balance of calories, protein, vitamin C, thiamine, riboflavin, because a malnourished soldier is a degraded fighting asset, and scurvy is not a metaphor. It is a disease that killed sailors through the 18th century and was killing civilians in besieged European cities in the 1940s. And it needed to be something that a 19-year-old from Georgia would actually eat when he was cold and exhausted and had just watched his friend die. That last requirement is the one that doesn't appear in the technical specifications, but that everyone working on the problem understood was primary. A nutritionally perfect ration that soldiers wouldn't eat was not a solution. A ration that provided adequate calories while being tolerable enough to actually consume. That was the target. Not good, not delicious, adequate and tolerable, edible under conditions of extreme stress. The K ration, the C ration. Small, dense, calculated packages of calories and protein. Crackers, a tin of processed meat product, hard candy, instant coffee, sometimes a cigarette. Everything measured, everything optimized for weight and volume and stability. The tin of meat product was texturally uniform, moderately salty and protein dense, and it was not good in any way that the word good typically implies. It sustained. That was the requirement. And then the men came home. 12 million of them. Between 1945 and 1947. They came home having spent years eating food from tins and packets, having been conditioned by necessity, by repetition, by the association of that food with survival, and with the specific experience of being alive in a war to accept convenience and uniformity and adequacy as normal. Some of them hated the rations. Some of them were simply accustomed to them. All of them came home, and they married women who had also during the war been managing rationed households. Real food in reduced quantities, substitutions and stretches. The wartime cooking of making do, which is its own kind of knowledge and its own kind of change. And those men and women bought houses in suburbs that were being constructed faster than American suburbs had ever been constructed. Levittown appearing in 1947 out of a Long Island potato field, 17,000 homes built in 4 years, and then more Levitt towns, and then the suburb outside Chicago that Margaret Holloway would live in, with her yellow and white kitchen and her continental foods casserole recipe. And into those kitchens the food companies arrived, not as adversaries, as solutions, as answers to genuine problems. The women in those kitchens were busy in ways that were new, some of them working outside the home, all of them managing the machinery of suburban life, the children and the school schedules and the community organisations, and the husbands who had come back from the war and wanted the home to be a certain kind of place. They needed food to be manageable, consistent, not a source of failure, and the food companies offered exactly that. Ruth doesn't spend her entire day at her workstation. Part of Dr. Briggs's approach to his junior technologists is insisting they understand the industrial process, not just the chemistry, but the scale, the physics, the actual material reality of what happens when you multiply a laboratory formula by a factor of 50,000. Today, between the morning's test batches and the afternoon's analytical work, she takes the stairs down to the ground floor and walks through the fire door to the production area. The production area is a different country from the fourth floor. Up there, controlled, small, precise. Glass vessels, careful measurements, the chemistry of individual reactions documented in steps, everything at human scale. Down here, loud, large, physical in a way the laboratory forgets to be. The main production floor for the soup line runs the full length of the south wing, maybe 300 feet she's estimated it, with a ceiling that rises 30 feet to an infrastructure of pipes and ducts and ventilation fans. The light is industrial and even, and makes everything look flattened and slightly unreal, a quality she's noticed before and can't entirely account for. The noise is specific and layered. The rhythmic thud and pressure release of the mixing drums, which are stainless steel vessels the size of small cars, their paddles turning at a controlled speed, incorporating the dry ingredients in a sequence that matters. The order of addition affects the homogeneity of the final powder, the way the different particles bind to each other and remain mixed rather than separating by weight in the package. The rattle of the conveyor belts, a continuous metallic sound underneath everything else. The high-pitched sealing machines at the end of the line, which run fast and make a sound like a repeated small impact. Fwop, 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 as they bond the glassine packaging closed around each packet. Everything is in motion. Nothing waits. The ingredients come in from the loading dock end. The dried vegetable flakes in their cardboard drums, slightly reddish from the carrot, slightly green from the parsley. The sodium powder in its bags poured into hoppers. The modified starch, which is white and fine and behaves slightly like talcum powder, catching the air when the drums open, hanging briefly visible in the light. The autolyzed yeast extract in its 50-gallon containers, a dark amber paste that smells intensely and specifically of the savoury compounds Ruth has been working with all morning in more concentrated form, and the flavour concentrate, the chicken flavour, chicken natural, chicken enhanced 7C, in its small bottles. The amount that fills a coffee mug is sufficient flavouring for 10,000 packets of soup. 10,000 packets from one coffee mug. This ratio is why the flavour library exists, why Dr. Briggs's division has the budget it has, why a difference of 0.5 gram in a formula matters enough for extended testing. 0.5 gram per packet, multiplied by 10,000 packets per production run, multiplied by however many runs per week, per year, across the entire product line. Workers in white coats and paper caps move between the stations, with the particular efficiency of people who have done the same movements, enough times that the movements have become automatic. Frank at the mixing station, she knows his name from the weekly floor visits, adjusts a hopper angle without looking at it directly, his body oriented toward the machine while his eyes check the instrument panel. Dolores at the sealing station checks the sealed packets for defects with the speed of someone whose hands know the difference before her conscious mind has processed it. Ruth stands near the conveyor and watches the packets come off the line. Each packet is small. The glassine packaging is printed with the Continental Foods logo, Chicken Noodle Soup Mix, and a photograph of a bowl of soup that was shot in a studio with a food stylist who knew how to produce the specific visual qualities, the richness of colour, the shimmer of the broth, the placement of the noodles and the vegetables that convey what the product aspires to be. Not what it is, what it aspires to be. She watches the packets for a while. She tries to count them and stops because counting makes it arithmetically concrete in a way that does something to her she hasn't fully named. She thinks of her mother's soup, her mother's actual chicken soup, which required an actual chicken, and which took most of a Saturday, and which began as a smell of raw onion and garlic going into cold chicken fat in the cast iron pot. A sharp, bright smell, slightly raw, that meant the soup was starting, and which then changed over hours into something richer and deeper and more complex. The collagen loosening from the bones and joining the broth, the fat rising and being skimmed, the herbs added late so they didn't lose their top notes. By mid-afternoon, the soup was filling the house from the kitchen outward, moving through the rooms like something alive so that you knew it was coming from wherever you were in that house, and the knowing of it created a specific kind of anticipation that was about the soup, but also about the afternoon and the season, and your mother in the kitchen, and everything that assembled itself round a pot on a stove. That smell, that specific accumulation of time and chemistry and place, cannot be reproduced in a 2 milliliter brown glass bottle. Not because the chemistry isn't sophisticated enough, it is sophisticated. The people in Ruth's department are not fools. They are rigorous scientists working with legitimate precision. But because the smell of her mother's soup is not just a chemical compound, or a combination of compounds, it is a chemical compound plus a specific Saturday afternoon, plus a specific kitchen, plus the specific lived knowledge of a woman who has been making this soup for 30 years, and who makes it differently in winter than in summer, because the chicken is different, and the root vegetables are different, and the light through the window is different. None of that is transferable to a formula. Ruth goes back upstairs. Lunch is in the company cafeteria on the second floor, which runs on the interesting principle that it almost never serves Continental Foods products, which you've noticed, and you've noticed that other people have noticed, and you've noticed that nobody mentions it, tells you something. The cafeteria serves sandwiches and hot plates and soup that comes from a Polish woman named Irina, whose operation is in a basement kitchen 2 streets over, and whose pierogi, available every Thursday, are the subject of genuine sustained enthusiasm among the production staff in a way that no Continental Foods product has ever inspired. The enthusiasm is specific, personal, and slightly reverential, the kind that attaches itself to food that someone clearly knows how to make. You eat lunch with Eleanor Frost, the other woman you've become closest to on the 4th floor. Eleanor graduated from Northwestern with a degree in biochemistry, is 31, has a direct way of talking and a habit of leaving things half-eaten when she's thinking hard about something, as if the thinking requires the same resources as digestion, and the body can only do one at a time. I've been looking at the salt study specs, she says today, unwrapping a sandwich from the deli 2 blocks away, which she brings from home because she believes and has stated that the cafeteria bread is structurally problematic. And the palatability thresholds are based on studies from 1948 and 1949. She takes a bite. Military palate studies. I know. Briggs mentioned them. Military palate studies conducted on men between 18 and 35 who had been eating military rations for 2 to 4 years. She pauses with the precision of someone building an argument. Do you see the problem? Their sodium tolerance was calibrated to rations. Their sodium tolerance was calibrated to rations. Our consumers aren't soldiers eating rations. They're housewives in Evanston who've been eating our products for 5 years. Their baseline expectation of salt in food has been set by our products. She takes another bite, chews, considers. Which means the current formulas already represent a feedback loop. The consumer expects the sodium level we trained them to expect, and we're using baseline data from a different consumer who was trained by a different food system. This is the kind of conversation you have with Eleanor, and it's the kind that leaves you uncertain whether you're looking at something important or something you can't do anything about, which are not always different things. Have you told Briggs? I'm going to. I wanted to think it through more first. She wraps the rest of her sandwich, sets it aside. I'm also interested in who actually commissioned the study and what they're going to do with the findings. Because if the purpose of the study is to find out what consumers can't taste, then the useful outcome for production is lowering costs. Right. Lower sodium, lower cost, sustained palatability. That's a reasonable business objective. But the framing of it as a health or quality initiative, if they choose to frame it that way externally. She picks up the sandwich again, decides against it. The science would need to actually support that framing. You eat the cafeteria soup. Irina's soup. Real soup. It has depth the way. Real broth has depth. The kind that builds as you work through the bowl, becoming richer toward the bottom where the proteins have settled. The kind that sits in your stomach with a satisfying weight, rather than dissipating in 20 minutes. It has a faint herbal quality that might be marjoram, difficult to identify with certainty but present, contributing something to the overall impression that you would miss if it weren't there, even if you couldn't say what it was. This soup cost 10 cents more than anything Continental makes in that building. You think about what the 10 cents is paying for. At 2 in the afternoon, with authorization from Dr. Briggs, you go to the flavor library to select concentrates for the reformulated soup's testing matrix. The room is kept at 65 degrees Fahrenheit and 40% relative humidity, which are the conditions that stabilize volatile compounds in storage. You've been in here perhaps 20 times. Each time you stand at the threshold, for a moment before going in, because the ambient smell of the room before you open any bottle is something you want to pay attention to. It smells like the idea of food. The distilled, concentrated, collective essence of the contents of 247 small brown bottles, releasing their volatile compounds at room temperature through their stoppered lids, layered, dense, sweet at the front from the fruit concentrates along the north wall, more complex underneath from the savoury section, something slightly resinous and dark from the bottom shelf where the smoke concentrates live. It smells like a memory of food from a dream, rather than food you've actually eaten. It smells like a culinary library rather than a kitchen. You put on your lab gloves, nitrile, powder-free because the powder interferes with sensory testing, and move to the chicken section. Chicken natural, derived from actual chicken fat, rendered and concentrated. The label includes a batch number and a provenance, Iowa, 1956. It smells, when you briefly crack the stopper, intensely and specifically of chicken, but an intensified chicken, a concentrated version, not quite what you smell in a kitchen, but what you'd smell if you somehow distilled a whole afternoon of stock making into a single breath. Chicken Enhanced 7C, a blend of chicken fat derivatives and synthesized compounds. It smells similar to the natural, but with less variability, more consistent, the same in every application, which is a property the natural lacks. Real chicken fat varies with the age of the chicken, the breed, the diet. 7C is the same every time. Consistency in industrial food production is worth more than authenticity in most applications. Chicken Umami Boost 3, mostly MSG. When you crack this stopper, the smell is less specific and more general. A savoury weight that your brain interprets as protein, as nourishment, as something being cooked somewhere. This is the compound that turns the volume up. You carry the 3 bottles to your workstation. You set up 5 small batches of soup base, varying hydration levels and concentration ratios in a matrix you've designed to isolate the interaction you're looking for. You boil each sample for the prescribed time. You let them cool to serving temperature, not fully cold, not hot, but the temperature at which a person would actually eat soup. You label them with random codes so you can't identify which is which when you taste. This is the essential discipline, not knowing what you're tasting. Knowing what you're tasting changes what you taste. It's not weakness of character, it's not dishonesty. It's how the human perceptual system works. Expectation shapes perception, reliably, measurably, across all human subjects regardless of training or intention. The only way to get around it is to not know. You wait for the samples to reach temperature. While you wait, you think about flavour. Most people believe flavour is primarily a function of the tongue. The tongue detects 5 categories: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, umami. But those 5 categories alone produce what a professional calls taste, not flavour. Flavour is the much larger experience, the full complexity, the specific character of a thing, and upward of 80% of what you experience as flavour is olfactory. Retronasal smell. The volatile compounds that travel from the back of your throat through the nasal passage as you chew and swallow, reaching the olfactory epithelium from the inside. This is why food tastes flat when you have a cold. This is why smelling something is often richer than eating it. The smell reaches the olfactory system from the outside with the full complement of aromatic compounds, while eating that same thing heats it and drives off some of those compounds before they reach the right receptors. Flavour is, fundamentally, smell translated into the experience of eating, and smell because it is processed by a more ancient part of the brain than any other sense, a part with direct connections to the limbic system, to memory, to emotion, is inseparable from context, from memory, from what you've smelled before and what those smells meant to you. This is why chicken natural smells like chicken, and why, when Ruth's mother makes soup, it smells like more than chicken. The samples are at temperature. She begins tasting. 2 weeks later, Dr. Brigg sends Ruth and Eleanor to Oak Park for consumer observation. Consumer observation is exactly what it says. You go to a grocery store, you watch people shop, you have a clipboard and a structured observation sheet. You do not approach anyone, do not identify your employer, do not take photographs. The store is an A&P. Recently expanded. 8,000 square feet of retail space, which is large enough in 1956 to be described as a supermarket, a word that is itself relatively new, applied to a concept that is newer than the word. For most of American grocery history, you went to a grocery store and a man behind a counter got your things for you. You told him what you wanted. He went and retrieved it. He knew you. You had an account with him, potentially. He could advise you, substitute things you'd run out of, warn you about quality. He was part of the food system in a human relational way. The supermarket replaces this with something structurally different. The goods are on open shelves. You circulate among them. You choose for yourself. No counter, no man, no relationship. Just you, the products, and the arrangement of those products in a space designed with genuine intentionality, with research behind it, to influence your behavior in predictable directions. Fresh produce is at the front. This is not accidental. The colours and textures of fresh produce, the red of tomatoes, the green of peppers, the orange of carrots, create an impression of freshness and abundance that, research shows, elevates the perceived quality of everything encountered subsequently. You enter through colour and life, and your brain carries that impression into the processed food aisles. Ruth stands in the canned goods aisle for a long time. The aisle is 60 feet long, shelving on both sides, floor to ceiling, every square inch covered. Campbell's, Del Monte, Green Giant, Heinz, Libby's, Bird's Eye in the freezer case at the far end, store brand alternatives at lower price points, sometimes the same food in different packaging, sometimes genuinely different. The colours of the labels, designed to be readable from 20 feet away, designed to create visual interest and differentiation in a field of visual competition that is continuous and intense. The children's products have the most aggressive colour, the cereal section especially, Post and Kellogg's and General Mills competing in a space of maximum brightness, boxes covered with cartoon characters and cartoon animals, and cartoon astronauts and games and prizes. A woman with 2 children stops in front of the cereals. The children are maybe 6 and 8. The younger one points at a box. The older one pulls a different box from the shelf and holds it with the confidence of someone who's already decided. The mother checks the prices. She puts both in the cart. On her clipboard, Ruth writes, "Dual unit purchase. Children appear to be primary selection drivers in cereal category." She watches for an hour. The patterns, women buying things they've bought before, moving through the store with the efficiency of a memorized route. Occasional pauses at new items, but infrequent purchase of them. Consistent response to promotional shelf tags. The yellow burst reading special value, regardless of whether the price is actually different from normal. The Jell-O section. 7 flavours. Recipe cards hanging from a metal display rack in front. Each card showing a photographed gelatin mould that is structurally impossible at home preparation scale, produced in a studio by a food stylist, with professional grey gelatin at a concentration higher than what's in the box, under lighting designed to produce specific highlights. Ruth writes, "Aspirational food photography creates expectations the product cannot meet. Consumer purchase may be partly aspirational, toward the image rather than the product." Then the frozen food case, the Swanson TV dinner. She stops in front of it. It's been on the market 2 years. A complete meal. Turkey, stuffing, sweet potatoes, peas, in a segmented aluminum tray. Designed to be heated in the oven in 25 minutes and eaten from the tray in front of the television. The packaging shows a family watching television, trays on their laps, everyone comfortable and smiling. dinner having happened without requiring the kitchen at all. 25 minutes from freezer to table. Ruth holds the package. She reads the back. Her mother's Sunday chicken took 6 hours. She puts the Swanson TV dinner in a basket, which she's been carrying as cover. She will take it home. She will heat it and eat it from the tray in front of the television that she and Dorothy got in October, and she will take notes on a piece of paper balanced on her knee. Oak Park, a Saturday morning in November. The observation program brings Ruth to 214 Chestnut Avenue, to a kitchen that is both representative and specific in ways she'll think about for years. Margaret Holloway is 34, blonde going slightly darker, wearing a house dress and an apron with an efficiency that says she put it on without thinking, the way you put on things you wear every day. She opens the front door quickly, as if she's been near it, and the sound from the back of the house. Children, activity, something being argued over, doesn't change her expression in any visible way. She has the particular composure of someone who lives in constant managed noise and has developed the ability to hear it without responding to it at every moment. The kitchen is yellow and white and a specific mid-century optimistic about what kitchens can be. The appliances are good. A gas range with 4 burners, a refrigerator with a rounded top and a small metal handle, white metal cabinets with simple hardware. The counter has a clean archaeology. Flour canister, sugar canister, toaster, electric can opener in a slightly honoured position that suggests it was a recent gift, a recipe box with a hinged lid, and a row of canned goods that includes, among others, a can of Continental Foods chicken soup concentrate. Coffee, Margaret says, please. She makes it in an electric percolator while talking. She talks easily and without apparent self-consciousness about the week. The church committee, the 3rd grade teacher issue, Gerald's car. Ruth listens with attention that is not performance. She's genuinely interested, in the way she's been interested in every person she's met in Chicago, who is not a food scientist, which is most people. The children appear briefly and then are redirected by Margaret with fluid economy. Toast from the counter rack, Wonder Bread pre-sliced, and then disappear. What's on the menu today? Ruth asks. I was thinking a roast for tonight, and for lunch probably the casserole. Margaret opens a cabinet and holds up the can of Continental's chicken soup concentrate. The recipe on the back. Ruth knows this recipe. She has made this recipe approximately 20 times in the company test kitchen. She has adjusted this recipe. She has adjusted the formula that produces the soup that goes into the can that produces the casserole. My mother-in-law thinks I should make soup from scratch, Margaret says, returning the can to the counter. She says from scratch with a tone that is not quite apologetic but aware of a judgment. Somewhere, some invisible standard against which she's being measured. She makes it from a carcass. Takes all morning. My mother does too, Ruth says. Oh, does she? Something shifts in Margaret's expression. A relaxation. A recognition. Mine too. My mother spent all of Saturday on soup in winter. But honestly, she gestures at the kitchen, the house, the implied children and Gerald and committee and car. The gesture takes in everything. By Wednesday, when I'm making dinner, I need it to be done. Do you think the canned version tastes different? Margaret considers this with a seriousness that Ruth finds unexpectedly moving. I think it tastes like what it is, she says finally. It tastes like the casserole. The kids eat it. Gerald doesn't complain. A pause. Whether it tastes like what my mother makes, she shakes her head. I don't think that's really the question. My mother's not here on Wednesday to make soup. The electric can opener cuts through the lid. The sound, a specific mechanical progress, the blade turning, the lid curling back. The soup comes out in a cylinder, the moulded shape of the can, that specific jiggle, and falls into the saucepan with a soft thwump that Ruth has heard 100 times in the test kitchen. The smell is immediate, familiar, savoury, slightly meaty, the MSG doing exactly what it's designed to do, making the brain receive the message that something nourishing is happening. In this kitchen, on this Saturday morning, it also smells like lunch being made, like a person doing what needs to be done, like care, offered in the form of a casserole rather than 6 hours over a pot. Ruth watches Margaret cook. She takes her notes. She tries to stay neutral. She is not entirely succeeding. The salt study runs through December. Ruth designs the taste testing protocol. 40 test subjects, employees from different departments, ranging in age and background, blind testing of 6 soup variants at different sodium levels. The test measures thresholds. At what sodium reduction does the product cross from tastes right to tastes off? The goal is to define the margin. She runs it carefully. She runs it more carefully than the production team probably expected. What she finds is consistent with what Eleanor predicted. The threshold is higher than the 1948 military baseline. Consuming current Continental products has calibrated the test subject's expectations upward. But the threshold is also more variable than the company's standard consumer modelling suggests. Some test subjects can detect a 5% sodium reduction, others don't notice 20%. The variation is significant and follows patterns, age, dietary habits, whether the subject grew up eating processed foods or home-cooked foods, that the simple baseline model doesn't capture. She writes this up carefully. All of it, the findings that support the reformulation and the findings that complicate it. Elena reads the draft. This is honest, she says. That's the intention. They may not want all of it. She hands it back. The part about dietary background affecting threshold perception. If that finding is in the official report, it implies that consumers who grew up eating home-cooked food will notice the change more than consumers who grew up on processed food, which implies the company's long-term self-interest is in cultivating consumers who don't have the comparison. Ruth looks at the pages in her hands. That's not what the data says explicitly. No, but it's a reasonable inference from the data. So should I take it out? Eleanor considers this for a long time. I wouldn't take it out. I would make it as technically specific as possible, the data, the p-values, the confidence intervals, and present it as a scientific finding rather than an implication. Let whoever reads it draw the inference if they're going to draw it. And if they choose not to draw it, then you've done your job. The data is there. She picks up her coffee. The data is always there. What people choose to do with it is something else. January 1957. Continental Foods holds its internal annual outlook presentation. Ruth and Eleanor sit in the back of the third-floor conference room, which has been configured with a projection screen and rows of chairs and coffee service from the external catering company. Ruth has her notebook. Eleanor has her characteristic expression of professional neutrality, the one Ruth has learned to read as suppressed strong feeling. Numbers first, always numbers, sales figures, unit volumes, market share percentages. The soup lineup 4%. Gelatin product flat, which the sales director describes as holding position in a competitive landscape. the new seasoning blend ahead of first-year projections. Then Walter Pierce, Vice President of Product Development. Silver-haired, 60 years old, the particular authority of someone who has been translating between science and business for a long time, and who's gotten very good at speaking both languages simultaneously. He talks about the American housewife. He describes her, 32 years old, 2 to 3 children, 12 fewer hours per week available for food preparation than her mother had. Working outside the home in increasing numbers or engaged in the expanding organizational life of suburban communities. She wants meals her family will eat, Pierce says, that she can produce in less time with consistent results. She is not interested in failure. She's not interested in the skill requirements of traditional cooking. She's interested in confidence. He clicks to a slide. Time spent on food preparation, 1935 to 1956. A line going steadily down. Our job is to sell her confidence. We're not selling soup. We're not selling gelatin. We're selling the assurance that when she puts this on the table, it will be what she promised it would be. Ruth is writing. Traditional home cooking doesn't always deliver on that promise. A roast can be dry. A pie crust can fail. Scratch soup can be too salty or too bland or, God forbid, something the children won't eat. Our products don't have those problems. Within the preparation instructions, they deliver consistent, predictable, acceptable results every time. Acceptable results every time. Ruth underlines, acceptable. Pierce clicks to a new slide, a map of the United States. Distribution points, dense on the coasts, filling in toward the centre. We currently reach 63% of American households through retail distribution. Our 5-year goal is 90%. This requires geographic expansion and category expansion. He talks about breakfast, dinner, baking. He talks about the frozen food opportunity. He talks about the growth in TV dinner sales and Continental's consideration of entering the category. He clicks to a new slide. The skill-free kitchen. Our long-term vision is a kitchen in which traditional cooking knowledge is optional, where skill is replaced by systems, where the quality of the result does not depend on the experience of the cook, but on the quality of our products and the clarity of our instructions. Ruth stops writing. She looks at the slide. The skill-free kitchen. She thinks about the woman at the stone mortar in Sheboygan, grinding dried thyme. She thinks about the mushroom note in her grandmother's recipe box. Only use mushrooms you have personally identified. She thinks about the knowledge that lives in hands and noses and accumulated years of practice with specific ingredients in specific places. All of that described on this slide as something to be made optional. Not by malice, not by contempt for the people who hold that knowledge, by the logic of a business that has identified what a large number of people want: confidence, consistency, time, and built a system to provide it. The system works. The graph goes up. What it replaces is not measurable on a graph. She looks at Eleanor. Eleanor is looking at the screen with her careful neutral expression, the one that means something she's decided not to feel in this room. Pierce moves to the next slide. The presentation continues. The second-floor bathroom has more privacy, as Gretchen told Ruth on her first day. After the presentation, standing at the sinks, Eleanor says, "He's not wrong." She says it as if she's been arguing with herself about this for the last hour, and has finally reached a conclusion she doesn't entirely want. He's not wrong about the hours. He's not wrong about what people want. He's not wrong about what the market is doing. She dries her hands, folding the paper towel in the deliberate way she folds things. But the skill-free kitchen is not a neutral proposition. What do you mean? Skills are knowledge. Cooking knowledge is specifically knowledge that gives you independence from people who want to sell you things. She drops the paper towel. If you can feed yourself without our products, you have freedom we don't want you to have. Not consciously. Nobody in that conference room is consciously thinking this. But the logic of the business moves toward dependence. Every time someone loses the skill to make something from scratch, they become more dependent on the companies that provide the substitute. That's true of any skill you outsource to specialists. Yes, it's true of plumbing and carpentry, but you don't put plumbing in your body 3 times a day. She leans against the counter. The difference is that food is intimate in a way nothing else is. It becomes you, literally. And the values embedded in food, the care, the knowledge, the connection to place and season and tradition, those also become you, or they stop being transmitted. Ruth thinks about Margaret Holloway on Chestnut Avenue, about her casserole from the can, made with care, feeding 3 children who would grow up knowing that casserole as a normal Wednesday thing. Do you think the trade was wrong? Ruth asks. All of it. Eleanor is quiet for a moment. I think the trade was real. I think most people didn't know they were trading, and I think the food industry, us, our company, all of it, benefited from them not knowing. She pushes off from the counter. That's not the same as saying it was malicious, but it's not the same as saying it was neutral either. She opens the door. The data is always there, she says, which is what she said about the salt study, and which Ruth understands now to mean something broader. The evidence of what was lost exists, even if no one is looking at it. The bathroom door closes. In spring of 1957, a small crisis arrives that becomes Ruth's largest project, the strawberry gelatin, Continental's best-selling flavoured gelatin product. Marketing materials bursting with real fruit flavour. Ingredient list. Artificial flavour. Consumer research consistently showing satisfaction ratings above category average. Until this month's competitive analysis, which has revealed that a competitor's reformulated strawberry rates significantly higher than Continental's in blind testing for natural fruit taste. The meeting is in the main conference room. 6 food scientists. Tim Strom from marketing, who wears his suits as if they require active maintenance. Harold Vance from production, who has the face of a man who's been absorbing the word cost for 20 years and has made his peace with it. 8 cups on the table. 4 Continental. 4 competitor. Nobody knows which is which. Ruth tastes her way through them with professional attention. The difference is in the top note, the very first milliseconds of flavour, the compounds that volatilize fastest and reach the olfactory system first. The competitor's version has something brighter there, more complex, closer to the top register of an actual strawberry. It doesn't taste like an actual strawberry. Nothing in a gelatin product will taste like an actual strawberry, but it tastes closer to the memory of one. Thoughts, Dr. Briggs says. Eleanor, the top note. Something in the low molecular weight fraction. It's escaping into the air faster. James Keener, senior flavour chemist, quietly precise. More retronasal aromatics on the front end. We could analyse the volatile fraction. Tim Strom. Can we match it? James. We can probably identify the main compounds. Whether we can replicate exactly Strom. Close enough that consumers can't tell the difference. Ruth. From what? Strom looks at her with the particular patience of someone managing upward on a difficult problem. From the competitor's product. I meant, she's committed now. Close enough that they can't tell the difference from the competitor, or close enough that they can't tell the difference from actual strawberries. Silence. The production manager stops looking at his cost calculations. The baseline for flavour matching is usually the competitor or the market average, she continues. But if we're reformulating anyway, we could choose a different baseline. If the reason their product rate's higher for natural taste is because it more closely approximates real strawberry volatiles, we could go to the original rather than to their version. That's a longer project, James says. Probably 3 to 4 months longer. More expensive, Harold Vance says on schedule. Yes. She looks at Strom. But the marketing positioning from Tastes Like Real Strawberries is more durable than better than competitor X, and it's defensible. If the volatile analysis supports the claim, we have the science behind it. Strom looks at his notepad. Calculating. Dr. Briggs. Run the volatile analysis on the competitor's product. And Ruth, run a parallel analysis on fresh strawberries. Let's see the data before we decide. The meeting ends. In the corridor, Eleanor. The marketing angle was well done. It's also what I actually believe. I know. That's the only way to make the business case honestly. The strawberry reformulation takes 8 months. It is the most technically demanding project Ruth has worked on. The volatile fraction analysis requires gas chromatography equipment borrowed from the analytical chemistry department and a week of running fresh strawberries. Sheboygan strawberries, brought back from a June visit home in a paper bag and processed immediately, through a methodology she designs herself. The final formula is not perfect. It cannot be perfect, because perfection would require it to smell like a specific strawberry from a specific field on a specific day. And that is not what a commercial formula is, but it is closer. Measurably, verifiably, reproducibly closer to the real thing than the original formula was. In consumer testing, it scores significantly above both the original and the competitor's product for a natural fruit taste. The product launches in the spring of 1958. It sells well. Dr. Briggs gives her a raise and assigns her to lead the next reformulation project herself. Eleanor leaves Continental Foods in 1959. Not dramatically, she takes a position at a university research hospital studying the relationship between diet and cardiovascular health, a field beginning to gather the kind of evidence that will eventually produce the most contentious nutrition arguments of the 20th century. She goes with the same directness she does everything. Come with me, she says the last week, to academic research. The science is more honest there. In theory. In theory. She laughs, the brief sharp laugh she has. Probably. But I'd rather be wrong in the direction of truth than correct in the direction of profitable. You think about this for a long time. You stay at Continental. You stay because the work is real, and because the problems are interesting, and because Dr. Briggs, for all the constraints of his position, does care about quality in a way that shapes the culture of the fourth floor in ways you don't want to lose. And because leaving would mean ceding this particular ground to people who might not notice the metallic aftertaste. The years continue. You're 28. The industry is enormous now. The A&P in Oak Park has been joined by a Jewel and a National Foods and a new format store 15,000 square feet, larger than anything existing in 1955. The frozen food section has 2 full aisles. Prepared meals have expanded, frozen casseroles, frozen pot pies, frozen pasta, frozen breakfast, things that would have been impossible in 1952 and that are unremarkable in 1960. A national conversation begins, scattershot and academic, about nutrition. Not yet public policy, not yet the dietary guidelines, but starting. Researchers publishing, journalists beginning to ask questions. Dr. Briggs retires in 1963. His farewell party in the fourth-floor conference room includes better catering than the building has ever had for an internal event, which he notes with dry satisfaction as proof that food quality matters. His replacement thinks about food science primarily in terms of competitive position rather than scientific curiosity. This is a subtle shift, but a real one. You keep working. You work on a low-sodium soup line in the mid-1960s that arrives slightly ahead of the public conversation about sodium and blood pressure, and therefore gets repositioned twice before the science catches up with the marketing. You work on a natural flavours initiative that runs into the fundamental problem that natural flavours are more expensive and more variable than artificial ones, and the premium market for them is, in 1965, smaller than the company's projections. You work on a children's food line that uses more colour and sweetness than anything you've worked on before, and that sells in numbers that dwarf every other project on your record, and about which you have complicated feelings that don't simplify with time. Rachel Carson publishes Silent Spring in 1962. It's about pesticides specifically, not food science broadly, but it begins something. A public questioning of the food supply that has no direct precedent in American culture. People start reading labels. Not many at first, but the number grows. The counterculture arrives with its food politics. Organic, natural, back to the land. Small health food stores, dietary theory. This is marginal in 1966 and will not be marginal forever. You're watching all of this happen. Margaret Holloway continues serving continental products for years in the Yellow Kitchen on Chestnut Avenue. Her children grow up eating them. By the time her oldest daughter has her own kitchen, she can make the casserole from the can, but she cannot make chicken soup without the can. Her mother's generation made a choice, genuine, reasonable, made under real constraints. Her daughter inherited a starting point. Her daughter's children will inherit a different starting point from that. The chain of knowledge that ran from grandmother to grandmother to grandmother is not broken exactly, but there is a gap in it, the size of a decade of Convenient Wednesday, dinners. The frozen food section continues to grow. The TV dinner becomes something you can heat in 15 minutes in a new kind of oven that Continental's parent company's research division has been watching with great interest since 1955. The microwave. It arrives in American homes in the late 1960s. Expensive at first, then less so, then standard. Each step of convenience makes the previous step feel like labour. Each generation's baseline becomes the previous generation's nostalgia. You are 51 years old when your mother dies. It is 1983. You are a senior food scientist. You have been a senior food scientist for 7 years. You have won 3 internal company awards and been passed over for 1 promotion, and won a different one and managed a team of 12 people, and eaten approximately 40,000 meals that you've prepared yourself, increasingly, with real ingredients from sources you've researched, in a kitchen in Lincoln Park that is the kind of kitchen of someone who's thought hard about what she believes and arranged her life accordingly. Your mother dies in the farmhouse in Sheboygan, 81 years old, in March, when the ground is still hard and the apple tree in the yard is bare. You go home. You do the things that need doing. You and your brother close up the house. In the kitchen, you find the recipe box, wooden box, painted blue once, and faded to something quieter. A chip on the lid from something at some point. Your grandmother's handwriting on the side in pencil. Recipes. A. Kowalski. Inside. Index cards. Dozens. Your grandmother's handwriting, your mother's handwriting in two distinct scripts. The grandmother's more formal, the mother's more hurried, filling in additional notes over the years. A conversation between two people who are never in the same room at the same time anymore. Conducted through margins, beat borscht. A marginal note from your mother. Use the smaller beats from the east bed, the sweeter ones. The big ones are mealy, rye bread. The hydration instructions span 2 cards, with a pencil drawing in your grandmother's hand showing the cross-section of the properly developed dough and the crumb structure you should see. Pickle brine proportions with seasonal adjustment notes. Summer ferments need more salt because the ambient temperature is higher and fermentation moves faster. A mushroom soup. 4 asterisks next to the mushroom selection instructions. Your grandmother's warning in slightly heavier pencil pressure. Only use mushrooms you have personally identified. Never buy from strangers. The mushroom knowledge, still there, inscribed on a card in a blue wooden box in a kitchen in Wisconsin. You sit at the kitchen table with the recipe box open in front of you. Outside, the apple tree is bare. The sky is the specific grey of March in Wisconsin, a grey that has no drama in it, just persistence. Somewhere in this country on a production floor, a conveyor belt is running. Packets are being sealed. Each packet represents a meal that will be added to a pot of boiling water by a woman who doesn't think about the production floor, who's thinking about Wednesday and the committee meeting and the car. The meal will be fine. It will nourish adequately. It will be done in 12 minutes. You pick up the card with your grandmother's rye bread instructions. You read the pencil drawing. You read the cross-section of the crumb. She drew this so that whoever came after her would know what to look for, would know the difference between bread that worked and bread that didn't, would have in their hands the feel of dough at the right moment. The drawing cannot teach you the feel of the dough. Nothing except making the bread can teach you that. But the drawing is evidence that she knew the feel and wanted you to know it, and was doing everything a piece of paper could do to transmit it. You close the recipe box, you take it home to Chicago. The kitchen in your house in Lincoln Park is the kitchen of someone who's arrived at something through contradiction, rather than starting from it. The cast iron skillet, black and well seasoned, has been with you since 1968. The stock pot in which you make real stock, actual bones, from the butcher 3 blocks over whose name you know and whose father ran the same shop, has been with you since 1972. The knife block contains 3 knives that are good enough to matter and that you keep sharp with a whetstone on Saturday mornings in the way that rituals accumulate without announcement. There is also, in the pantry, a can of Continental's tomato soup, because sometimes it's Tuesday and you want tomato soup and the real version requires 30 minutes you don't have, and the can version requires 5 and is, within the terms of what it is, fine. Both things are true simultaneously and continuously and without resolution. This is the part of the story that doesn't simplify into a lesson, the part that resists the clean arc. You spent 25 years helping build the system that Margaret Holloway used on Wednesdays. You've also spent 25 years making real stock and reading your grandmother's recipe cards and thinking about what was lost and whether it mattered. and how much, and to whom? The answer to all three of those questions is it mattered a great deal to people who didn't know the loss was happening, and people who did know, people with Eleanor's clarity or your own developing version of it, found ways to work within the system while keeping something else alive in parallel. Not enough to change the industry, enough to keep the thread from breaking entirely. The pendulum is moving now in 1983. The farmers' markets appearing in cities that haven't had them in decades. The cookbooks that teach technique rather than recipes for canned soup casseroles. The people asking where their food comes from in a way that continental food's original vision did not anticipate, and does not entirely welcome. It won't swing all the way back. The infrastructure of processed food is too large, too embedded, too woven into how a country of 230 million people is fed. And there are genuine goods in that infrastructure. Consistent nutrition, reduced seasonal constraint, access for people who don't live near farmland. But the pendulum is moving. You cut an apple from the farmer's market, small, slightly irregular, the green deepening to red at the shoulder, and eat a quarter of it over the sink. The flavour is concentrated and specific and slightly complex in the way that things grown in actual soil, with actual weather behind them, are complex. Not just sweet, but something more mineral underneath, a faint tartness that changes as you chew. It tastes like a specific thing from a specific place. That specificity is the thing the flavour library cannot reach. Apple, natural. 12. A is not this. Apple Natural 12A is the idea of this. The idea is not wrong. It is technically sophisticated, chemically legitimate, and adequate for its purpose. But adequate is not the same as specific, and specific is most of what real flavour is. 7 o'clock. The kitchen is dark except for the light above the stove. You've made soup. Real soup. A chicken carcass from the butcher, which has been simmering since mid-afternoon. The smell of it built through the hours. This is the thing about real stock. The smell doesn't arrive. It accumulates. 4 o'clock. The clean, slightly mineral smell of the water and the raw bones. An animal smell. Honest about what it is. 5 o'clock. The first sweetness as the collagen begins to loosen from the bone, the broth taking on the slight shimmer of dissolved protein. 6 o'clock. The herbs you added at the right moment, not earlier. Thyme and bay, the thyme from the pot on your windowsill, not the same as your grandmother's thyme from her specific garden, but in the same family, carrying some of the same relationship between the plant and your kitchen. 7 o'clock. Something complete. A smell that fills the room not by force but by accumulation, by being everywhere at once. The soup is ready. You can tell by the shimmer on the surface and the smell and the way the steam moves above the pot. Slightly heavier now, more body in it. You eat at the kitchen table, alone, in the lamplight. Your body receives this soup and knows what to do with it. Not metaphorically. The specific compounds in a long-simmered real stock, the collagen converted to gelatin, the minerals and amino acids in their particular proportions, the volatile aromatics from real herbs, interact with a gut that has evolved over millions of years to receive exactly this kind of nourishment and respond to it in specific beneficial ways. This is the science that Eleanor went to study in 1959, and that is, in 1983, producing a body of evidence substantial enough that the food industry is beginning to pay serious attention to it. The science of what real food does to a real body, beyond calories. You eat the soup. It is good. It is specific. It tastes like this particular afternoon, and this particular kitchen, and the bones from the butcher 3 blocks over, and the time from your windowsill, and very faintly, like all the soups you've eaten in your life that were this kind of soup rather than the other kind. After dinner you wash the pot, the hot water, the weight of the stock pot, the brush. Small physical facts. Your hands are red from the heat when you're done. Then you take the recipe box to the kitchen table. You read recipes for an hour. Your grandmother's handwriting and your mother's marginal notes. The accumulated knowledge of women who cooked with what they had and knew what they were doing. You pick up the apple cake card. Your grandmother's recipe, which you've eaten but never made. Your mother knew it by heart and needed no card. You know nothing except what's written here. At the bottom, in your mother's handwriting, use the apples from the east side of the tree. They're sweeter and the cake doesn't need as much sugar. The east side of the tree. The specific, irreducible, non-transferable knowledge of a specific yard. You cannot make that cake. Not because you can't follow the recipe. You can. You're a food scientist. Following recipes is the smallest part of your skill set. But you cannot make that cake as your grandmother made it, as your mother made it. Because the knowledge in that marginal note is knowledge of a place that no longer exists for you in the present tense. You close the recipe box. Outside, Chicago's continuing without your permission, which is its habit. Somewhere south of here, a second shift is running. Packets are being sealed. Trucks are being loaded. The system is operating at scale. It is not nothing. It is not evil. It is the accumulated logic of a century of choices made by reasonable people serving genuine needs in ways that also cost something that wasn't on anyone's balance sheet. You know what the cost was? You've spent 25 years being part of both sides of it. You go to bed. The bedroom is quiet. The recipe box is on the nightstand. You put it there without deciding to, the way you put things near you that you're not ready to put away. Your body carries the day, the weight of your legs from standing in the kitchen, the slight ache across your shoulders, the warmth of real food inside you settling. Think about the length of the thing we've traced tonight. A man in Paris in 1810, putting glass bottles in boiling water because it works. A naturalist in Labrador in 1915, watching a fish freeze in 90 seconds and thinking, there's something here. A laboratory in Chicago in 1942, calculating protein content and shelf life for men who are crossing oceans to fight a war. A conference room in 1957, a slide saying the skill-free kitchen, a yellow kitchen in Oak Park, a can opener cutting through tin, a cylinder of soup falling into a pan, a recipe box, an index card, a penciled note about the east side of a tree. None of it was malicious. Every step was someone doing something reasonable, something useful, something that answered a real problem. Appert wanted to feed an army. Birdseye wanted fresh food to last. Dr. Briggs wanted adequate nutrition at scale. Walter Pierce wanted women to have more time. Margaret Holloway wanted dinner on Wednesday. All of these are real needs. All of them were met. What was not counted in the meeting, what was never on the slide, was the woman with the mortar and the dried thyme. The chain of knowledge, the specific taste of things grown in specific places by specific people, whose understanding of those places lived in their hands and their noses and was transmitted through doing. That knowledge was not on the graph that went up. That knowledge was on the graph that went down. And most of the people whose graph it was did not know the graph existed. This is how history works mostly, not with villains, with many reasonable people whose collective direction was not chosen by anyone. The direction emerges from the logic of each individual step. Each step is defensible. The cumulative direction is something that would not have been chosen if stated plainly at the beginning. If Walter Pierce had put up a slide in 1957 that said, "In 50 years, most Americans will not know how to cook from scratch," no one in that room would have chosen that. But the slide he put up, the skill-free kitchen, the vision's consistent results without required skill, pointed in exactly that direction, and the system executed it efficiently over the following decades. Your breathing is slowing. The recipe box is on the nightstand. Tomorrow you will go to work. There will be formulations and consumer data, and the ongoing negotiation between what you know is good and what the business can support. There will be the soup line and the flavour, library and the elevator, and the same particular smell when the fourth floor doors open. But that's tomorrow. Tomorrow there will be the decisions. Tomorrow there will be the trade-offs and the arguments and the small choices that accumulate into something larger than any single choice. Tomorrow there will be all the ordinary work of being a person who knows things and tries to use that knowledge without pretending the constraints don't exist. But that's tomorrow. Right now, in this room, with the recipe box on the nightstand and the city outside going about its late business, that's later. Let the work go now. Let the fourth floor go. Let the flavour library go. All those brown glass bottles with their stoppered essences, their concentrated ideas of things. Let the conference room go. Let the slide go. Let the graph that went up and the graph that went down both go. Let your mother's kitchen come back. It will. In the hour before sleep, when the defences are down and the real memories move forward, it always comes back. The cast iron stove, the sauerkraut crock, the apple pie in the window, the smell that was the whole language of that kitchen, accumulated over decades of the same woman making the same things in the same space, until the smell was not just cooking but presence. Let it come. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have work that is yours, and a knowledge that took years to acquire, and a recipe box with handwriting in 2 different scripts and the memory, reliable, persistent, 27 years later still alive, of what real food smells like when it builds over a whole afternoon. That's not nothing. That's more than adequate. That's enough. Centuries will pass. The factory on the south side will close eventually, or transform into something else, or be converted to lofts for the people who move to cities in search of the kind of life that cities offer. The yellow kitchen in Oak Park will be renovated by someone who doesn't know about the casserole. The A&P in Oak Park will close as A&Ps do. The flavour library. Those 247 small brown glass bottles, probably incinerated at some point, their volatile contents dispersed into the air above some south side block. The idea of strawberry and the idea of chicken and the idea of roasted onion briefly present in the atmosphere and then gone. The recipe box will outlast all of it. Index cards are surprisingly durable. People will still stand in kitchens, still do the thing that humans have done since they first learned to control fire, taking raw things and applying heat and knowledge and ending up with something that sustains them, and, on good days, something that tastes like where they are and who they're with. The hunger for specific things will not go away. The need to be nourished by something real, something that came from an actual place, that impulse runs too deep to be entirely educated out of a population by a century of convenient alternatives. Some things don't change. The need to eat and the desire to eat well and the specific pleasure of food that tastes like itself rather than like the idea of itself, those don't change. The need for rest doesn't change. The need, at the end of a long day, to lie down and let the machinery of the mind go quiet and let the body do what bodies do in the dark, that doesn't change. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took your mother and her mother and the woman on the ship who crossed the ocean with the knowledge of mushrooms. Let the city go. Let the factory go. Let the decades go one by one. Let your hands rest. The hands that have measured and mixed and tasted and documented and negotiated and held index cards in the lamplight. Let them rest now. Let the knowledge rest. It'll be there tomorrow. The knowledge doesn't sleep. Only the person does. You've been carrying this for a long time. You can put it down now. The recipe box is on the nightstand. The handwriting is there. The intention in the handwriting, the specific loving attention of someone who knew that the apples from the east side of the tree were sweeter and wanted you to know it too, is there. It will be there in the morning. Sleep. Let it go. Let the dark do what the dark does. Good night.